Good evening, everybody. Great turnout. Thank you all for coming. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Shall go straight into the presentation. The disclaimer, quite important. We've told the market that we are about to publish a new resource statement, so some of this presentation will be hopefully obsolete in a couple of weeks' time, but we're going to give you as much of it as we can. We're listed on AIM, and we IPO'd in 2017, actually at 40p. You can see that the share price has rather tracked the fortunes of the copper price, which is really the main metal that we're going to produce. The plan for Phoenix is to put an old copper mine in Idaho in the United States back into production and use the cash flow generated from the early production of the surface mine to explore a big sulfide belt, and then underneath that a massive tungsten and molybdenum porphyry system, which we have underneath. Hands up anybody who knows the price of tungsten in here. So,
$250 per MTU at the moment.
Correct. Yes, around $25,000 to $30,000 a ton. And molybdenum. Anybody know the price of molybdenum? Yes.
I think it's fairly similar.
It's a bit higher. Yeah. Anyway, and the copper price is currently around $6,500, $6,490 a ton. Our market cap is around just over £6 million. We've raised over £9 million since our IPO, and we're hoping that our share price might begin to start following the copper price up. Our last resource statement was published in November 2017. Since then, we've drilled 93 holes. Shareholders, management owns 11%. Morbath Fund, which is quite an influential fund manager at Capital Group, who owns it in a personal capacity, owns 6.9%. And XGen, which is the Canadian company from whom we bought the project, which is TSX listed, owns 3.4%. Management, that's rather an old photograph of me. Dennis Thomas, who's sitting just here, is rather more experienced than I am. I've been doing raising money for mining stocks with mining companies since about 2003. Dennis has got 47 years experience. Richard Wilkins, our finance director, I met in Tashkent in 2002 when he was the finance director of a company called Oxus Gold, which some of you might remember was quite a successful AIM-listed mining company until the Uzbeks waited for them to produce over 500,000 ounces of gold and then stole the project from them. Roger Turner was also one of the founders of Oxus. Again, I've known him for 18 years or so. So this is not a hastily assembled bunch of promoters. We all work together. Ryan McDermott, who's our Chief Operating Officer, he is from Idaho, graduate of Idaho State University, and he spent several years putting a gold mine into production in northeastern Siberia, just north of Magadan in the Gulag, for Kinross. And he's very delighted to be back in Idaho working on a project which should be a bit of a walk in the park in comparison to what he's been used to over there. Andre Cohen, very experienced banker and logistics man, is our non-exec, and Jason Riley from XGen is also a non-exec director and quite helpful to us dealing with the North American matters. I'm now going to hand over to Dennis, who's going to give you a more detailed overview of the project itself.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, the flagship project, the Empire, as Marcus said, the Empire copper mine, the old copper mine, So it's basically what we call a brownfield site mine, and we're just commencing a bankable feasibility study. Expected to complete probably sometime around this time next year, with the aim of putting it in production in 2021. It's a skarn deposit, which is basically a metamorphosed limestone. Basically, the limestone has been baked by a rather large igneous intrusion, which has been basically mineral bearing, and the copper, zinc, gold, silver, and in fact tungsten have come up in a zone system, along with lead as well, lead and zinc, particularly further up. It's 80% owned by Phoenix. We're also about 100 miles north of the Empire Mine in the Idaho Cobalt Belt. We have two highly prospective claim blocks either side of the historic mining town of Cobalt, which is the most prospective belt in the USA, if not the only one actually. And that's owned by 100% subsidiary company of Phoenix. Geopolitical stability. Mining Journal, in fact, in their 2018 World Risk Report, perceived risk ranking for Idaho was the lowest in the world, along with Finland. So the mine itself in Idaho, northwestern United States, in the Rockies. The mine itself located in Custer County. Brownfield site. It's 4 miles away from a town called Mackay, population of about 500. We recently increased our land package to 5,717 acres. Excellent infrastructure, 4 miles from town, high tension power line running through the middle of where the open pit will be, water, accessible year round, and not far away airports in Boise, Twin Falls, Idaho Falls, access main highway running Route 93, which runs up through Idaho to Canada. It really is couldn't be better. Idaho, fastest growing state in the United States, which has a natural resource based economy. Federal and state permitting. It's always a question that comes up in Idaho. Well, good heavens, you know, the permitting process is long-winded. Not anymore. Now, in fact, they have a concurrent federal and state permitting process. Donald Trump has actually kicked the backside of the people involved and said, right, speed up the process. And so has the outgoing governor, Butch Otter, said exactly the same. He set up a new Office of Energy and Mineral Resources within the governor's office, which now basically fast tracks permission for granting mining licenses. And as we've said, the lowest mining investment perception risk. The Empire Mine, copper, gold, silver discovered in 1988, and in fact the mine commenced underground production from 1901 to 1942. The underground production went down. It's on the side of a mountain. The bottom levels were 1,100 feet below the very top levels, which will be the top level of our pit. 1,100-foot intervals, adits, and in fact the mining was done along basically very high-grade sulfide lodes. So if you can imagine veins, the reason that between 6 and 8% recorded by the mines inspectorate, because they used candles and they literally, they could not see any ore beneath 6%. It was as simple as that. Much of the copper was held in oxide form. The technology wasn't around at that time to recover the oxides, so a lot of it went down the valley and has been lost. But the average recovered grades, 3.64% copper, 1.65 grams gold, and 53 grams silver. Interestingly, though, the final production from the mine at depth was in fact tungsten, and the mine closed down in 1942. Last grades from underground were 4.28% WO3 in the lower levels, which effectively made it a tungsten mine. And in fact, the mine closed down because the United States entered the war, and the young men went off to war. And in fact, Ryan McDermott, whose Marcus was talking about before, his grandfather actually worked underground in the mine and went off to war at that time. This is a very busy slide, and I'll go through it very, very quickly, but it's the chronology. Copper gold discovered in 1888, right the way through 1942, the mine closed down, and then a period from 1964 to 1997, a load of drill holes were drilled in the very, very top portion, in the oxide portion of the ore body. Metallurgical test work done by Canadian juniors, and effectively copper grades up to 13.5% in the open pit in the surface were returned. 2015, we in fact took an option on the property, which we exercised in 2017, and we've had 2 drilling seasons, basically 2017, 2018, and in 2000 we came in fact with a PEA in April last year, preliminary economic assessment, and we've had a drill program, and effectively we have now nearly 400 holes. All of the historical drill core and all of the sampling that was done here is in fact in our core shed in Mackay itself. Very briefly, we have Mackay town is over here, population of about 500, 4 miles to the west. We have Elise's here. We originally took an option here, which is where the Empire ore body is. The old horseshoe mine and further workings up here. We've acquired these in a series of acquisitions, and the Navarre Creek. Our land here, the blue, is patented land, and most of our present ore body actually sits on patented land, which is effectively our property. This is in fact federal land, which is owned by the Bureau of Land Management and the United States Forestry. The Empire mine itself, the pit that we're going to be mining, is in fact here. We had initially the work that we did here confirmed about just over 1 kilometre long, that pit, and in fact we acquired last year the horseshoe block, which is above, and also extended down here. So if you can imagine this ore body, the skarn ore body comes along here, goes up here, and we did some sampling in this last field season to identify a further extension here. So we've gone from effectively being 1 kilometre long to being almost 5 kilometres, 5.35 kilometres long. So we've extended the ore body here. The mineralisation here is the copper, zinc, gold, silver, and tungsten. Interestingly, this is a lead, zinc, copper area here. And these, as you'll see, lots of markings here. These are old workings. This is a section taken from A here along to A there. So we've gone along that section. We made a discovery last year, the back end of last year, of the Red Star zone, and we've always known that there's a difference here in mineralization. In other words, that this is what we call a zone system. So this is all copper. This, in fact, is copper at depth, but going into lead and zinc and silver. So the copper system here is faulted down. Red Star we found there. We expected this to go to that point there, but in fact we found that this is a big block here which has been basically pushed down, and we have the whole of the copper zone in this, what's here, underground here, copper zone going down into the tungsten. So effectively, and I'll draw a section later on, but this is where the open pit will be, the oxide open pit will be. And that's the red star was there, which basically I called the missing link, which was between, if you like, our open pits that were planned in the PEA that we had, and the horseshoe block, which is to the north. So this proved the continuity of the ore body. Effectively, we have where the open pit is going to be. This is an area, if you like, a cross-section where the pit will be. Surface, we have an oxidized ore body. The ore that comes up originally is in sulfide form. The weather, basically weathering, oxygen, water, groundwaters and everything, oxidize the copper sulfides and change them into copper oxide minerals. And this is where the open pit will be. So if you can imagine that we'll open pit this, but the potential here, nobody has ever done any exploration work of anything of the skarn in this portion, and in fact of all of the underground sulfide portion. And we know historically that these grades, as I say, were 6 to 8%. And in fact, in this area, we're looking at very high-grade tungsten. So this system is going into copper tungsten down here. And further along to the right here is, in fact, the extension, which goes into the horseshoe block. This is the Navarre Creek, which is 4 miles to the west. Here we have a three... I'm back into miles again, I'm afraid, but this is just around about 4 miles, just under 4 miles of what we call a hot springs deposit, a jasperoid gold deposit, very much like the Carlin Trend mines geology. In fact, it's that style of mineralization. So it's a very, very exciting gold prospect 4 miles away from the main system. But interestingly, it's all part of the main system. So on pace to become one of the US copper mines. Basically, an important thing, we had a recent review of the mine and the geological system by Nigel Maund, who's a consulting geologist, and he believes that we've only, in fact, tested 1 to 2% of the ore system. We know the same mineralization occurs 9 miles away, so it's a considerably large system, and as our geologists would say, we're biting it off. We're taking it in bite-sized chunks rather than the whole lot. And I'm happy to talk through it with anybody if they want to talk to me about it afterwards. These are our figures. Basically, $1 billion worth of metal in the ground on last year's PEA for what we have in the open pit at the moment. Company milestones, the track through here, important thing, construction, commissioning. Where we are at the moment, we're doing the bankable feasibility study. That will go into next year. This is the work the way through the permitting process, but looking to track into production in 2021 from what we call a simple heap leach SXEW plant. The real meat in this deposit is in the underground sulfides. There is an enormous untapped wealth of sulfides beneath this pit. And as Nigel Maund says, 1 to 2%. I think this is what we're really targeting. You want to take over on the cobalt?
Yeah, the cobalt is also a very important metal for us. We've got 1,180 acres of concessions in the Idaho Cobalt Belt, which is 100 miles north in the next county, Lemhi County. And Ryan, who we referred to earlier, when he was a student geologist, he was working for Noranda in the area. They were actually looking for copper. And he had all his notes from his field work. And when we realized that most of the world's cobalt is produced in the DRC, and all the electric car makers were very keen on buying it, we decided to go and peg 2 of the most prospective assets in the area. So up here is Bighorn. We're surrounded by other miners up there, and Redcastle, we're bang next door to a company called US Cobalt, which owns the Iron Creek mine. US Cobalt was purchased by First Cobalt last summer for 149 million Canadian dollars in shares. They're bang next door to us, and we've done some surface sampling on these properties. It's cobalt parts per million, so that's 0.13% cobalt, and anything above anything above 100 parts per million on surface sampling is a good indication that there's some decent stuff underneath. The grade on the Idaho Cobalt Belt is fairly uniform. It's around 0.5 to 0.6% cobalt. Cobalt price is currently $35,000 a ton. It has been up to nearly $100,000 a ton last year. Had a big run up, and we're hoping to do a decent field season, some auger drilling on the cobalt deposits this summer, and proving up the kind of resource which will maybe get some of our neighbours interested. There is a cobalt smelter being built in Pocatello, which is about 3 hours drive south of us, so we're hoping that that's going to be quite an exciting part of our portfolio going into the future. There's a slide on the corporate structure. Copper market overview. A lot of it's all about on the supply side. It's all about China, which consumes about half the world's copper, but India is picking up. Vedanta have had to close their smelter down in the south of India due to pollution considerations. So there's a big supply problem developing in copper. We hope that we're going to see quite a strong copper price over the next few years. Certainly, some of the other commentators are forecasting that. Again, there's more detail on the copper. This is all on our website. Anyway, we're in this because we think we can generate some serious cash flow in the short term from the open pit mine and use it to prove up a substantial regional system. Contact information there. One thing I haven't mentioned is that we're covered by 5 analysts. So our Nomad is SP Angel, Simon Beardsmore is the analyst there. Brandon Hill are our brokers. Peter Rose covers us. Hall Garson, Christopher Eccleston covers us there. We're about to be covered by Hardman & Co, by Paul Milcreast, and Arden Partners. Charles Fitzroy is the analyst there. He also covers us. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention. Any questions?
Super. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Have any questions, please? Hands in the air. Gentleman here, please. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for the presentation. Your main asset has been owned in recent history by, I think, 6 companies, or 7 if you include XGen. So what's different with your approach that will give investors confidence it'll get into production?
We're production people. We have the intention of putting in, we see it for what it is, which is basically if you like, for want of a better word, a starter. If you like, the open pit, the oxide is really a starter pit for the bigger picture. We're production people. I've been, in fact, one of the roles I've had in life since 1984 is going around evaluating, looking at all sorts of, if you like, early stage projects. Quite frankly, I was flabbergasted when I saw this and saw it for the first time, and I saw it for the first time back in 2011. That nobody had ever considered the sulfide. It had been on the, basically been on the radar of Canadian junior companies who were, for want of a better word, drilling directors' holes. I think 1996 97 Cambior, who you may remember, who were a very reputable Canadian junior. They in fact worked up a resource and in fact a reserve on the property then. And I think everybody's just been re-drilling it, putting more holes in to raise more money. And I don't want to be too cynical about some of the motives of some of the companies that have been doing it. Promotional.
Cambior got Briex was the Cambior's problem that
Yes.
they got cold feet after that.
But I mean, quite frankly, we have every intention of putting this into production, and it really is the. I always say it's the tip of the iceberg. This is a major system. I don't know if you saw earlier this month, we had a press release which basically was Nigel Morn report we reported on. And Nigel, in fact, wrote his original report in 2015. And Nigel, I've known for many years, was instrumental in looking at Olympic Dam when it started up and basically interpreting that correctly. And he looked at this and said, wow, it's a big system. In the oxides, you've probably seen 5 to 7%. Well, I was with him last month, and he was bouncing off the walls looking at this, and he said, this thing is even bigger. But our problem is, being a small company, we have to focus. And we're focused on, if you like, getting some revenue in from that starter open pit. Then, as Marcus said earlier, then look at the sulfides underneath, which in fact really are the main event as far as we're concerned. But the object is to get some revenue coming in so that we can reinvest it to go underground and have a look at where the real story is. And underlying this whole thing is a big, without doubt, a big, probably molybdenum tungsten porphyry system.
Thank you.
Any other questions, please? If I may, what would you estimate the life of the open pit then?
Well, we're looking at various options on it, and which is why I mentioned that some of this might be out of date certainly in a month's time. The thinking is that we could probably generate, perhaps produce from the open pit mine around 6,000 to 7,000 tons of copper cathode a year, which would bring in, at current prices and the kind of production costs we're looking at, could bring in EBIT of around $20 million a year. That kind of ballpark, and that would be quite a. That mine life would be sort of 10 years plus, just on the copper, and then the gold and silver would then kick in later on, because the permitting on that takes longer.
So whilst the open pit gets you going, it is a meaningful.
Yes, it is. I mean, it doesn't turn us into Rio Tinto overnight, but it's certainly support a much higher market capitalisation than we have at the moment.
Having said that, it's interesting with coming on the radar because of, if you like, the potential of what we're sitting on. We are now becoming on the radar of let's say, larger companies.
Yeah, we're hoping that we've been talking to some of the big trading houses and things about going into production, not by issuing more shares to our long-suffering shareholders who paid 40p a share at the IPO. We would, if we can, we would like to fund the capex for this, which I would say would be, I don't know, something of the order of, again, this is we're just working this out at the moment, but it would be $40 or $50 million to go into production. So
processing is very, very simple.
It's perfectly doable without with project finance.
I think the amazing thing about this is that it's a very simple operation, and particularly initially getting the copper out and then getting the gold and the silver out. Well, it'll be copper and zinc initially, but then the exciting thing is really then getting stuck into the sulfides, and I might add Navarre Creek, which is gold, which is the claims that we have if you like, to the 4 miles to the west. But as a lot of investors remind us, we've got to keep focused on getting into production.
Any other question I had, and this is kind of an ignorant one on my part, can you explain the difference between patented versus unpatented land and the significance of those?
Yeah. Patented land is land that, for want of a better word, is actually owned by the company. And the permitting process for that, in fact, is very simple. We can basically put drill pads on there without necessarily going through the permission that one had, for example, to do diamond drilling. The unpatented land, which comprises of most of the property, the main ore body that we have at the moment is on our patented land, but then to do on unpatented land, that's effectively owned by the Bureau of Land Management or the Forestry. So it's a federal process, and we have to go through the federal processing, which is probably about a year, something like that.
Does it add to the level of bureaucracy?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But sorry, just to finish, the beauty of it now is with the federal with the unpatented land, it used to be sequential, state, and then federal.
Yeah.
Now, thanks to Mr. Trump, it's now actually parallel. So it effectively halves the time.
Gentleman here, please, question?
Thank you. That's really interesting. With regards to the patented and unpatented, you've partially answered my question. What percentage of what you own is patented versus unpatented?
Relatively speaking, a small portion. I think we've 23 claims. I'd need to look at the figures exactly what percentage, but it's where, in fact, on that blue part, you'll see the ore body is actually in the patented area. And in fact, we have waste dumps and various things in that patented area. So it's a small part. If you like, the extensions to the ore body going north, it's all on unpatented claims.
Yeah. If we had to, we could do the open pit mine entirely on patented land, but it would be more expensive to do so. But yeah, if Trump got impeached and we had a democratic government, and they decided that they didn't want mining to happen anymore, we'd still be okay. We still have a project, but obviously the best thing is to have the open pit mine on the patented, and some of it will spill over onto the unpatented, but that will just be a couple of leach pads.
It's interesting. This afternoon I was talking. I spent an hour and a half with a very good consultant friend of mine. And he said that the one thing he said you've got to bring home, he said in your presentations, is the fact that Idaho has had a reputation for being very awkward when it comes, I think that's probably being polite, when it comes to granting permission for mining and the process in terms of the length of time. He said, and it isn't now, and he in fact visited Idaho with me last year, and he said, you just need to tell everybody that the whole thing is streamlined. And it's the governor there, the outgoing governor, Butch Otter, and Brad Little, the new governor there, they've had road shows just basically encouraging people to come and invest in Idaho.
I accept I don't know whether you're positive or negative about Trump, but he won't last forever.
No.
But also we do have the rise of environmental issues.
Yep.
And you mentioned the waste dumps that you've got recently, rather, in the slides. How are you actually dealing with environmental waste?
Very good question. Yeah. We are very fortunate, and we're in a valley called the Valley of the Big Lost River.
Big Lost River, which is...
The Big Lost River, actually, if you like, the meltwaters from the mountains in the Rockies, comes down through Mackay and then disappears on the Snake River Plain, which is a basalt plain. It's an area of desert. And so it actually has no way in for the salmon and the steelhead. So we haven't got any migratory fish. The fish that have been put there, the trout, in fact, were imported. So we have no water problems with migratory fish. It's a brownfield site. It was historically mined since the early 1900s. So if you like, half the old mine buildings and everything are still up there. The town of Mackay itself mostly are progeny from the old miners who used to work there. So if you like, the ethos, we've almost got total support in Mackay from the people. We get encouragement. We're part of the local community. Ryan's grandfather worked in the mine itself.
The bottom of the open pit mine is over 1,000 feet above the water table. And then before we decided to do the project, we did all the visuals. It's very important that you can't see any of it. It's a bit like, have you ever driven along the M4 down towards Swansea and Neath? You can drive past these massive open pit coal mines and you can't see them. So the same thing will be the case with us. You have to fly over it to see it. And we've got the water rights to a creek that goes past the property, which flows enough water to support 10,000 tonnes a year, I think. Yeah. So,
I mean, we've
done that.
Yeah.
We've done our work on that.
We're doing all the wildlife studies. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And
no sage grouse.
yeah, no sage grouse. I'm delighted to say. Yeah, and yes, in the forests around there are wolves, there are bears, and everything. But it's a tourist place. There's a mine tourist hill. We work with the town. In fact, we will work with the town on the mine tours. It's an absolute delight of a place to be in. It really is.
I think on that note, we're done. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.